Hello there and welcome to the Talking City podcast, the Manchester City podcast from the Manchester Evening News. And if you've been waiting 2 days for some expert analysis in the match of the day style of the Manchester City win at Crystal Palace, we'll do our best to bring it to you. I'm not sure we've got the gravitas of Alan Shearer and Ian Wright, but we'll do our best. My name is Joe Bray and joining me is Simon Bajkowski. Si, how was your trip to Crystal Palace?
Yeah, it was very, very nice, thank you. Back a bit later than planned, but all okay. So a nice Saturday all in all. Just kind of trying to have some kind of normality amid the BBC eating itself.
Yeah, and we'll try not to do that in the next half hour when we're talking about City. And I did see some nice sightseeing pictures of your journey to Selhurst Park, but we'll talk about the game. Let's talk about the game.
No, let's talk about the journey because I don't want to be a grumpy old northerner, but just like so many trains to Crystal Palace, which is like probably. I think it's twice the distance from Crystal Palace to St Pancras in a car as it is from me to Manchester, and yet there are so many more trains that go direct, and they actually turn up on time and are not cancelled overnight. It's incredible, and it was a very scenic train through St Paul's and over the London Bridge, so it was a very nice start to the day. And Crystal Palace is it's kind of one of the more atmospheric grounds, isn't it? Like the fans are close in on you, but everything's quite close. The players have to kind of walk very closely past you to get anywhere, so they struggle to get away from you, which is nice for a change.
Yeah, that very much helps when you want to get one of them for a chat. I remember when I went to Palace a year or two ago, it took me an hour after getting off the M25 to get to Selhurst Park in the car, and your lovely train journey sounds far better than that horrible hour that I had. But yeah, no, City were quite good, weren't they? It was a 1-0 win, Erling Haaland penalty. They had to sort of be patient, let's say, for large portions of the game, but that feels like one of those wins that you look back at and think that's a title team. That.
Yeah, I was having this discussion at half time with someone that had they scored, it would have been a really good half, but because they didn't score, it was kind of like, well, that was nothing really happened. And I don't know whether it's kind of, you learn to sort of pay attention to what Pep Guardiola says more and more. It was kind of like, yeah, well, actually, you can't expect Man City to create too many chances because Crystal Palace guys, they're really good, and they were for most of the game, and so Palace said countless times in countless different forums before the game, mediums before the game, this is how we're going to make things tough for Man City, and they really did. And I think the captain Milivojevic pointed out in the programme that they were the only team last season to stop City from scoring in both games, and this season City have beaten them twice. So that is real season on season progress. And while he did miss a pretty bad chance in the first half, that's now 4 goals against Palace for Erling Haaland. So you would have to say that he has been pretty instrumental in City winning 2 games that they would not have won otherwise. So yeah, Palace frustrated them for a long time, but City played well, stayed patient, and got the win.
Yeah, I think that was, especially when it got into the second half and City were on top, and on Sky Sports they kept saying Crystal Palace have not had a shot on target for 2 games. They've still not had a shot on target, and it felt like one of those games, maybe a little bit like the Nottingham Forest one, where it was all City, but it just wouldn't go in the back of the net, and they just had to keep working hard and keep trying to sort of find those avenues, and they did in the end. And it was quite a simple routine, wasn't it? That it wasn't scientific, it wasn't a big long sort of flowing move. It was just a short corner. Ilkay Gundogan was alive to it, and Michael Olise somehow decided to clatter him over in the box. And I think it came like about 30 seconds after another penalty shout, which wasn't really a penalty. It was never going to be given, but the referee must have thought, oh, fantastic, I don't get any scrutiny on that previous decision because this is one of the easiest decisions he'll give all game. And yeah, Erling Haaland steps up. What was the atmosphere like in the ground? Was there frustration from the Crystal Palace fans? Because I would imagine they've worked so hard, they've played so well defensively, and then they just do something stupid like that.
Yeah, not as much as I would have thought. There was plenty of goodwill towards Vieira kind of before the game and signing autographs and everything. And even at the end, I kind of feel like they recognised that Palace did play very well, but we're also up against a very good side in City who sort of, were set up themselves not to give Palace anything. And I suppose whether by luck or design, City got their break by... City broke Palace's kind of resistance by exploiting kind of one of their worst defenders in Elise. And that was enough to do it. But it was a very good test for City, and Palace did play very well. I was kind of reminded of Palace-Liverpool a few weeks ago, when Liverpool, I think, were coming in off the back of a very good result. My FPL history would think so, because I think I had a few players and then they did nothing. But and Palace just kept Liverpool at bay, and they had a few chances and Liverpool had a few chances, but it was 0-0, and it was like, well, that was a good draw for Palace, but also kind of an example of why Liverpool are not challenging for the title. And you feel like City scoring and winning the game is kind of why they are and why they're good enough. And had they not scored, I would probably be saying that is maybe why Arsenal are as far ahead as they are. But they did score, so I'm going with the narrative.
Well, it's those sort of 1-0 games that can go either way, and it probably backs up what Pep Guardiola was saying, say at Nottingham Forest, where City dominated so much and should have won but didn't. And it's just that one goal, that one moment that really counts and changes how you think. I'm just looking now, Liverpool came into that game on the back of a 2-0 win at Newcastle. They did get trounced by Real Madrid in the week before, but I see your point. And Palace also held United as well, didn't they? They're not a bad team at home. They've caused City a lot of problems, especially in the reverse fixture as well. They went 2-0 ahead for, two pretty simple set pieces, but they still had to do it and went ahead 2-0 at the Etihad. And I think that was playing on Guardiola's mind, wasn't it? That if City let Palace sort of do what they can do, they will punish you. I asked Pep before the game and I said, is there any temptation to look ahead to the big week that you've sort of previewed and said it will be a defining week in the season? And he said, if we do that, we'll disrespect Crystal Palace and we'll come undone. And he named about 4 or 5 Palace players who absolutely rightly could cause City problems, and I think he did well by focusing on that and adjusting his team selection to account for the set piece threat, and the tactics as well were it wasn't a free flowing City side, because if you go sort of committing men forward, then Palace have those players like Zaha and Ayew and Elise who can break and can cause you problems. So I think Guardiola would have imagined a kind of game like that. It was exactly the kind of game that you would expect at Crystal Palace, wasn't it? And City now have quite a good record at Selhurst Park. They've not conceded for a while, but none of those games have been easy. It's always quite a grind down there. So I think Guardiola is aware of that, and you feel like increasingly so. Yes, he's been here 7 years, but he's always aware of what different grounds can do and how different games will set up. So I think all in all, a 1-0 win from the penalty spot, it might look on the face of it as, maybe you got lucky or whatever. I think that was a very well engineered result from City. And it's also good to see Erling Haaland back in the goals. I say back in the goals because he's what, on 33, 34 now. But he has slowed, his rate has slowed. But these are the moments where you need him to show up and stay calm and just put the ball in the back of the net. And he looked like a player who had not a point to prove, would you say? He was very emotional, let's say, at the end of the game.
Yeah, he was. He kind of went over at the end of the game to the City fans to applaud them, but also was kind of cupping his ear towards the Palace fans behind the goal. I hadn't really heard any stick that he'd been getting, but he clearly felt that there was something to be said. He's kind of as much as he's got ice in his veins, he's a very emotional guy and heart on his sleeve when he plays. And you could kind of feel the relief from him when he got the chance to score from the spot, and then also when he scored. But I think it's important that relief was there from before he took the penalty, which kind of shows you that this is a guy who does expect to score. He was like, thank goodness I've got this chance to make up for the earlier one. But yeah, he said in an interview afterwards, he said he was asked sort of what were you thinking about before you took the penalty, and he said the celebration. So that tells you some kind of special thing about what a special player he is. And yeah, it does feel like he hasn't scored that many goals lately. However, that is got league goal number 28, and we have 12 games to play still. So yeah, but he hasn't scored the bulk of his goals away from home either. He's been kept a lot quieter away. So, a very important goal. And like I was saying, like, he's been bought for the big moments in the Champions League and the Premier League, but the big moments in the Premier League can come away at Crystal Palace or at home to Crystal Palace when you're 2-0 down. You never really know until it happens where your season-defining moments in the league are going to be. And it was, a huge kind of celebration from Haaland, both when he scored and then shortly afterwards when City won the game. Very, very happy guy. Afterwards, he was sort of laughing and joking, and I think he roared as he came back into the dressing room after his media duties. So he was very happy indeed with that win. And yeah, because that penalty allowed him to change the narrative from another bad miss to another match-winning performance, basically, with his penalty.
Yeah, and like you say, that is what City bought him for, those sort of cool moments. And I think in one of his interviews he said we'd seen Liverpool drop points where they lost at Bournemouth. And if you compare that goal where Mo Salah had that penalty and he blazed it almost over the stand, you can that whole game was changed. Liverpool were never getting back into that game after that penalty. City had that penalty, scored it, and controlled the game from then on. And I mean, you compare City's result at Bournemouth, where they dominated. Bournemouth were good in the second half, but City were 4-0 up by that point. So these are the kind of games where City are sort of slowly but surely putting a run together, winning how they have to at these difficult grounds where not everyone is going to come away with the 3 points, and they're slowly putting that together. And do you think City would have dropped points in this game a few weeks ago in that regard? I'm thinking, I don't want to keep mentioning the Forest game, but the Brentford game at home, the Everton game, they've been guilty of not taking the chances in the past this season and dropping points when they shouldn't. They did last season. They were 0-0 at Selhurst Park. It feels like this is a game where maybe shows a bit of progress.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a bit of relief in the press box for the sort of City correspondents, because for a long time it was looking like we were kind of set for another game where City would drop points and nobody would be particularly pleased to have seen that 90 minutes, but Guardiola would come out with some justification afterwards and say, well, we didn't concede any chances, we kept Palace to a minimum, and we created, at least one, maybe a few chances to win the game. And you sort of go, well, that's true, but like, nobody really enjoyed the game and you've dropped points, but it's very hard to sort of pick apart the performance because it's just not quite there. Whereas, I think it's kind of a bit easy to slip into, these are the matches that champion teams win. But at the same time, there's a lot of truth in that. And City knew they needed to win, and they did enough to win the game, enough to take the lead, and then enough to protect that lead. So it was a really, really professional performance, and all they can do is put pressure on Arsenal, really. And that is exactly what they weren't doing, say, at home to Brentford or when they went to Nottingham Forest. I think when they went to Forest, Arsenal were the early kick-off and were at Aston Villa, having lost to City in the week and were behind at Aston Villa, and Kyle Walker got off the team bus and said, oh yeah, we're all aware of the Arsenal result, and then Arsenal ended up winning and City kind of blew it. So in that sense, it is progress for City. But I think also you can put it together with these 7 games beforehand that they've... I think it's now 6 wins and 2 draws in the last 8 games, and say that block of games, there is not a bad performance in them. And that is very, very promising for what lies ahead.
You've sort of answered a couple of my next questions, but in terms of the title race, yeah, it is one of those games where you're not going to remember really City's 1-0 win at Palace, but it is one of those important ones that you just have to get through and get the 3 points and move on. And Guardiola called this week decisive, defining in terms of the season. It's City's last game before the international break. Arsenal have another one, so can extend that lead, even though they will give City a game in hand. But Guardiola knew how important this game was just to get those 3 points on and do what City could do, and then go on, and we'll talk about the Champions League and FA Cup later in a little bit. But no, I think these are the games where City need to show Arsenal that they are improving, they are just going to win. Whatever they have to do, they don't have to play that well, or they played well, but not sort of pretty, not sort of free-flowing football. And yes, Arsenal went and beat Fulham, didn't they, quite comfortably on Sunday, but City can't do anything about that. And it seems like for months, all the players were talking about, let's put a run together. We need to put these sort of long runs of 10, 15, 20 games where we're not losing, which is, those are the runs that have defined previous title races. They've been saying they need to do that and then not backing it up on the pitch. I think now they are backing it up, like you say, 6 wins, 2 draws. If they can get through this week with 2 more wins, Guardiola will be happy because they're still in 3 competitions. That'll be 10 games, and I think that would be a real message to Arsenal, whoever they've got to play, that City aren't going away. And I think players like John Stones and Erling Haaland said that, didn't they, after the game, that they can't do anything about what Arsenal do. They can only look after themselves, but they have to just keep winning and show Arsenal that they're not going away. And it does feel like every game there's now a question. Well, there was anyway, but there's questions about Arsenal in the title race, and the answer's pretty much the same, isn't it, from Guardiola? But until they get a chance to overtake, then I think we'll be seeing the same thing, won't we?
Yeah, but like you say, it's really important because Arsenal do play again before City play. So had City dropped points this weekend and then Arsenal smashed Fulham, and the gap is 7 points and then 10 points if Arsenal win again. So City have gone from a place where they could have reduced the gap to 2 and now suddenly it's 10. That's huge. And this idea of winning game after game after game, it's exhausting for your opponent if they know that there's no hope for them. There's only the pressure that, well, they're going to win, so we have to win. And Arsenal have dealt with it superbly. I really didn't think after they lost to City at the Emirates, and then they really wobbled at Aston Villa, and Bournemouth was a bit more of a sort of blip, just one of those things. But they still came back and won. They've done so well, and City will really have to work hard and hope that they slip up unexpectedly to chase them down. But City getting back into that groove kind of helps to kind of exhaust Arsenal in a way that Arsenal have been exhausting City with these late comebacks and everything else. So we're at that stage of the season where Guardiola would want his team's performances to be good to give them the best chance in all 3 competitions, but also it doesn't really matter how you win games as such, as long as you win them. And that was true on Saturday. It will be true on Tuesday against Leipzig.
Yeah, I think you can point at City sort of grinding out a win at Crystal Palace and saying that's a kind of result of a team who has the credentials to go on and challenge the title. You can also look at Arsenal's late wins and sort of never say die attitude that they deserve a lot of credit for. And I think I was looking, and I think with City's what will be a game in hand after the FA Cup weekend, I don't think City play or will have a chance to play that game in hand until the sort of City will now have a game in hand for months as they chase Arsenal. So I think that will add maybe a different dynamic that we've not seen. I'm thinking of the season when Company smashed it in against Leicester on the sort of last week of the season and gave City the advantage right at the death. But that could be something that City have to deal with. But we will come back to the title race in due course. I think we'll switch our attentions now to the league in part 2. Hello then, welcome back to the Talking City podcast. We've just been discussing Manchester City's win at Crystal Palace. We will be discussing the Champions League. There were a couple of sort of selection decisions that we should get through first at Crystal Palace. Kyle Walker's had a sort of eventful week off the field. Guardiola sort of gave him a bit of bad, but then dropped him from the starting lineup. Similarly, for different reasons, Kevin De Bruyne in form, but Guardiola said he's ready to play these games, said he wouldn't necessarily start all the games, and then dropped him again at Crystal Palace. It was a back four of 4 centre-backs. How do you sort of rate or assess those selection decisions? Because it was 2 key players were dropped from the starting lineup.
Well, now that they've won, it's 2 terrific selection decisions. That's the case. Yeah, I mean, I think you could make a point for sort of keeping Walker and De Bruyne fresh for the Champions League. But I also think, having watched the Palace game, or, thinking what to expect from it, you can also kind of make a point without Leipzig that it made sense for De Bruyne and Walker to be on the bench. De Bruyne more than Walker because, Guardiola's super cautious of this real pace in the Palace attack that can cause them problems on the counter. Palace can cause them problems on the counter if City give the ball away in possession. Who's been giving the ball away more than anyone else, really? De Bruyne. Right, well, it kind of makes sense for him to be on the bench. Walker, I was kind of more surprised at, in the sense that he's usually the go-to against kind of Zaha with his pace, but at the same time, he has also, I think, made at least one big error against Palace, and I think the thinking is sort of, well, we don't need him to defend against counter-attacks if we don't concede any counter-attacks, and in that sense, it worked like a dream. Like, Walker is the man you want to be sprinting back, stopping attackers, but if they're not given that room in the first place, then you don't need him. And for centre-backs, John Stones is so versatile, popping up kind of all over the place, and he is it's really good for City to have him back. But all 4 centre-backs played very well. They did what they were supposed to do at both ends from set pieces, and the midfield worked very well as well. So I think, you can see how you could say Walker and De Bruyne on the bench at Palace and will play against Leipzig, but I don't necessarily think it's like that. I think it's just Walker and De Bruyne weren't as suited for the game plan that Guardiola wanted to execute as other players in the team.
I think it sums up the season, really, doesn't it? That less fancied players are sort of doing better and getting the rewards than the big names. And De Bruyne hasn't been at his best. He had the illness. Guardiola said he was passive, didn't he, against Bristol City in the first half, and he wasn't much better against Newcastle. I think on form, Bernardo Silva and Ilkay Gundogan are playing a lot better, and both have justified that selection with their sort of very hard-working performances at Crystal Palace. And I think he said with the 4 centre-backs, he said he wanted to be more solid, and I can understand why he's gone with those players who are probably a bit taller and a bit more organised as well from the set pieces. Palace obviously didn't have a shot on target, but they didn't ever look a threat like they did at the Etihad. And Guardiola hates conceding those easy goals, doesn't he? But those two against Crystal Palace. I think he called City soft after that home game for the way that they let Palace all of that game and force City to have to score 4 to win the game. So I think he will be a lot happier that they were just solid with those centre backs, and it just shows how many and who are versatile now. Like John Stones has appeared as a right back option, where he was never trusted to play out of central defence in previous seasons, and now he's playing at right back and inverting into midfield from the first minute, and it feels like it's just an evolution of the defence that Guardiola can do that, and you've got players like Akanji and Ake who just continue to play well and make it hard. And we're talking about this defence, and we're not mentioning Aymeric Laporte on the bench, who's not got a look in at the moment, and it's a good problem to have if we use that sort of cliche that Guardiola says every now and again. I want to go back to De Bruyne. He spoke in the mix zone afterwards, didn't he? He said, what did he say? I'm an old man. Talk us through what he said and his reaction to sort of that recent form.
De Bruyne is better than most players for speaking in the mix zone. The mix zone being kind of an area where reporters can stand after the game and ask players if they would like to speak to them. So De Bruyne are better than most, and they often say no. You get one, hopefully, and two if you're lucky, but sometimes none. But also, it tends to be players that have played well in that game or in form who are happier to stop. So, like Foden stopped after beating Newcastle, say. So fair play to De Bruyne for stopping after he'd played 10 minutes after being on the bench, and there's lots of questions around his form, and he was happy to take them on. And he said he's aware that he's not in the best form, but he's an old. I think he said, I'm an old man in this game, as in he's been doing what he's been doing for 8 years at City and much longer in his career, and saying, I will keep doing that and I will keep giving everything. And he said, if you're not in the team, then you have to come on and give everything for 10 minutes. And that's what I did. And that is kind of what we've seen over the last few weeks, that even though his kind of radar hasn't been there, the effort has still very much been there, and he's still very much contributing as a player. But I sort of asked him, whether he mentioned stats, and I asked him if he looks at stats when there's questions about his form, or he feels he doesn't play well. Does he kind of look at if his numbers are down, or if he if he needs to do anything, or is he more a player that relies on feel, and just goes off that and what people tell him? And he sort of said it varies, but he was well aware that he's assisted more goals than anyone else in the league, and also created more chances than anyone else in the league, despite having missed, I don't think he's started 5 of the last 9 in the league. So which is what we've been saying, that De Bruyne not being at the best of form is an issue for City, but De Bruyne at 60-70% will still produce a lot more than many more will at 100%. And he sort of said, "Oh, people expect me to score or assist every match, so it's fine." And someone said, "Do you think we have higher standards for you then, Kevin?" And he came back and said, "I have higher expectations of myself than you will ever have for me," which is very, very typical of De Bruyne, and absolutely fair to say. He knows that he's not at his best, but he is trying and working very hard to get there, and he's still contributing to the team. He came on at Palace and did a job, and there was one absolutely glorious crossfield ball for Grealish that he picked out as if it was nothing. So there's still plenty there, and I mean, I think he's speaking to to us today again in the press conference before Leipzig. So I'm sure he will have even more to say. But he is an old head. He's 31 in this team, and he's been through a lot. And he might not be as fresh as he was when he was 21, but he's still got a lot to bring, I think.
I think he deserves a lot of credit as well for coming up and, like you say, when it's not going well, taking those questions. It's not the first time he's done it this season, but it's so easy for him to be able to walk past and say, no, I've only played 10 minutes and I don't have anything to say. But he does come on and answer those questions, and he's probably going to be in a stronger position for it, for being honest and open and saying that. And that answer where he says he's got higher expectations than anyone else is it feels typical of him. But I'm just looking at his stats now. He's got 18 assists across all competitions this season. He's got 13 in the league, and we keep saying every week, don't we, that even De Bruyne at his worst could still go and break his own assist record.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Haaland. Like, we expect so many goals, but Haaland has dominated so much of the coverage this season that De Bruyne has almost been like forgotten about. And then it's like, oh yeah, we do expect De Bruyne to just find Haaland every game.
Sure, I'll have a lot to say about that when he speaks to the media before Leipzig, and we will now go ahead and talk about Leipzig after a short break. Welcome back to part 3 of the Talking City podcast. We've dissected City's very good win at Crystal Palace and Kevin De Bruyne's very intriguing interview after that game. And now we look ahead to Pep Guardiola's second decisive game of the really exciting Champions League last 16 second leg game against RB Leipzig. It was 1-1 after the first leg. It seemed like both sides were relatively happy to share that point. Guardiola said that he wanted control in that game rather than too much attacking. It felt like he was happy to take a point from Germany and bring it back to the Etihad. It's going to be it should be a good atmosphere. Guardiola sort of appealed already for the fans to come and help the team, and it's by no means a guarantee that City will be in that quarter-final draw, because Leipzig showed in that second half of that first leg that they are going to be a very, very strong opposition for City. Si, how do you see City lining up, and how do you see them approaching the game? Because they went for control in that first leg. Did they do the same at the start of this second leg and then go for attack, or did they just come out and try and blitz the opponent?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Leipzig did to City in that second half what few teams have been able to do this season in terms of kind of wrestling control away from them. You can kind of, City put in a very good performance against Newcastle, but also Newcastle missed a number of very good chances, and you can kind of see if City are that open again, they run the risk of Leipzig taking those chances, despite kind of the key absences they've got in attack. It's set to be a very exciting night, which is very good and not something that we can say very often at the Etihad for Champions League last 16 games, because normally City have won 5-0 in the first leg, and the second leg is always a bit, right, well, opportunity to rest, but there's not much to go at. It's very rare that you get a game at this stage at the Etihad that has jeopardy. I think everyone will be more up for it than they usually are, which can only be good for everyone. But it's kind of a test of City's sharpness, I would say. It's always Champions League, how sharp, clinical can you be? And it's because if they're not sharp on the night, then they're out. And all this sort of good performances and good run and 8 games very well that we've been talking about kind of gets kiboshed if City lose tonight, because one of their main objectives for the season will be over. So it is kind of do or die. You need to turn up and win this game by whatever means necessary.
Yeah, I think if you go out to Real Madrid or Paris Saint-Germain or Chelsea or someone like that, as City have done in the past, you can say, oh, do you know what? It was another team who's up there challenging for the Champions League. If you go out to Leipzig, they are a very good team, and Guardiola won't let you forget that. But it will be looked at externally as a last 16 exit when City should be competing to be in the final. And I think the team selection is going to be one of the most interesting of the season. And I'm looking at who played in Leipzig, and it was the game where Walker was essentially a right winger, and it allowed Mahrez and Grealish to play sort of inside the channels, if you like. And Bernardo Silva was there, but not really the left back, and Nathan Ake was sort of in a back three and patrolling. And it seems like those experiments have disappeared a little bit over the last couple of games. It's been a definitive back four with Ake as the left back in the last couple of games. So it will be interesting to see how Guardiola wants to approach that game, and does he want to bring Bernardo back as sort of a false left back, if you like, or is it going to be more of a definitive back four as he played at Crystal Palace? But then do you play Kyle Walker again? Does Aymeric Laporte come back in? There's only one or two, maybe three players who you can think, yeah, they're guaranteed to start. And I would say that's Haaland, Rodri and Ederson. I think apart from that, there's probably no one else who can confidently say, I will start. And like you say, with Haaland before, he's scoring a lot of his goals at home. Now, in the Sky Sports build-up to the Palace game, they had a stat about Jack Grealish, which said in the Premier League, so not the Champions League, but in the Premier League, all of his goals and assists have come away from home, and he's got a better success rate of his dribbling. And now City and home and away tactics are different, and how opposition sides set up are different. But that sort of made me think, does he start thinking about maybe Grealish not playing these sort of games, even though Grealish offers so much control and has been playing so well and seems to have that left wing place locked down. I don't think, even though we think, yes, he's been playing 10 games out of 11 on that left wing, he still probably has to fight for his place as well. So no, we predict this team every week, don't we? I've got no idea what Guardiola's going to do, what I'm going to suggest. I'm lost for ideas for this one.
Yeah, and that in part speaks to kind of how good Leipzig have been at challenging City, because after that second half, and also kind of Guardiola going on the pitch afterwards and saying to the players, that was really good. That was exactly what I wanted from you. Don't let your heads go down. And then coming out afterwards and sort of defending the point. We're not used to seeing City in this position. And so we're not used to how they will get out of it, and where they want to be in the quarterfinals. I think there will be, I kind of think it's unlikely that Laporte will come back in, just because he's not played many matches recently, and that's a separate bubbling topic that's maybe for another podcast. But Akanji, Ake, Diaz and Stones are all such good options. I think at least three of those start, if not four. But then I'm also thinking, well, is Rico Lewis an outside bet to come in instead of Walker and play that kind of multifunctional role? I'm not sure. It will all come down to how Guardiola sees the game, and does he want to kind of blow Leipzig away with you De Bruyne's and Foden's, or does he want to go with all-out control with you Bernardo's and Mahrez and Grealish, and also kind of adding Alvarez into the chaos crew, who kind of came on at Crystal Palace and again created something out of nothing. So does he go with that? It is going to be one of the more interesting teams of the season, I think.
Yeah, we're always set up for a Pep surprise, aren't we? But I think when that team comes out on tomorrow night at the Etihad, I think we'll be trying to work out who plays where and what system, and we'll settle on something, and then they'll line up, and suddenly John Stones is playing centre forward, and we've got no idea. So no, it should be a fascinating game, and one where, like you say, you can't really predict how it's going to go, but it is so important for City just to get through. And I think it will be a test of how far they've come in these sort of last 8 games or so, but also this season and what they want to do. This season has been the year where City have openly said, and the players, we need to win this Champions League, whether it's for our legacy or for Guardiola's legacy or, you know, just this group. They've been saying it very clearly, and, you know, if they were to lose to Leipzig, that would be a failure, you've got to say. But you can't underestimate a very good Leipzig side who did something that, as you say, few teams have done this season in that first leg. So yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it, and I'm going to let you go first with the score prediction because I'm stuck. What are you thinking?
3-0. 3-0. I think it'll be tight and tense, but I think they will probably add a bit of late gloss to the scoreline and go through.
I'll say 2-1 to City. I can see Leipzig doing something on the break or from a set piece like they did last time. I don't think City will have it all their own way, and I think there might be a few nervy moments, but no, they should get through and see what happens after that. So if you want to follow that, we will be at the Etihad tomorrow night and bringing you all the analysis for that. We will be back later this week with the Talking City podcast ahead of the Burnley game in the FA Cup and the return of Vincent Kompany. We'll also be obviously looking to see how City did at Leipzig and how that will affect their season going forward. And you can follow us both on Twitter. You can follow Manchester Evening News on Twitter at Man City MEN, on Facebook and on YouTube. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be back later this week.